Hi, this is Kristy with Guidepost to Wellness, and I am here with Chapter 7, one of my favorite topics in the book on mindless eating, which is comfort food. But the thing I found was really interesting is that this chapter pretty much busted a lot of the myths I think many of us have about comfort foods. I think that was really interesting. Myth number 1, most comfort foods are indulgently unhealthy. Myth number 2, people tend to eat comfort foods when they're only sad, stressed, or bored. And myth number 3, comfort food preferences are fixed when you are a child. So I thought this was interesting. They surveyed over 1,000 people, which is a pretty good sample size, and they found out that 40% of the folks, their comfort foods were pretty healthy, actually, types of foods. It wasn't just candies and cakes and things of that nature. It wasn't just fat, salt, and sugar. Those were the big 3. And part of it had to do with the psychological comfort and memories of the foods as much as just the taste and the flavor of the food itself. What I thought was really interesting is that the choices that were so different between men and women, and I'm not sure, this book's a little bit older and in some of the studies may be a little more dated, I'm just not sure, but I just thought it was interesting. They surmised that women chose more hassle-free type of choices like ice cream, chocolate, and cookies, prepackaged type of snacks, whereas men, yes, ice cream was a common one, but they really like soups and pizzas and pastas because they were more inclined to want dishes that made them feel pampered and loved by, their mother or their wife or something like that. I thought that was not sure about that. I also wondered some of it about with women, if some of the sweets and things of that nature were more based on the fact that a lot of women diet and maybe the deprivation type thing of always trying to watch what they eat. I'm not sure. But I can definitely understand that they did the survey and those were the results. That makes sense. But a few of the things that they chose to talk about with the comfort foods as to why or when people ate them, I thought this one was really interesting because it turns out that 86% of people chose a comfort food when they were actually happy, 74% as a reward. So that's quite the opposite of the myth, thinking that you only want comfort foods when you're sad or you're depressed. It did go on to say that 39% wanted it when they were depressed, 52% bored. Bored is a big one, and 39% lonely. So the thing that was also interesting is that the happier the mood, the healthier the food choices, because people were feeling good about themselves, and so they didn't want to sabotage their health by eating something really, really unhealthy. I thought that was kind of interesting. And they actually did a study of this with movies. You know how they like to do their movie and their popcorn studies. Well, they did 2 movies. One was a happy movie and one was a more sad movie. And they found out that people ate more of the buttered popcorn during the sad movie than the happy movie. I thought that was pretty interesting too. Sometimes people also associate their favorite comfort foods kind of in line with their personalities. And some of this is driven by gender, which I think was kind of interesting, but men were more inclined to eat steaks and hearty foods to make them strong. Some people chose things because they felt that they were a warm, nurturing person, and so they wanted a soup or something of that nature. So I thought that was interesting. I think I mentioned in the last chapter that there were a lot of studies done about soy, and one of the things that they recognized with men not finding soy as appealing and appetizing is because it just wasn't like meat or steak or chicken or something like that. So they talked about making the soy look more like foods that people recognize versus just the kind of off-white chunk of curd that it is. So that was one of the things that they came out of that too. Now, when we talk about comfort foods, I was sitting here trying to think some of my favorite comfort foods and when I started to really think about them, and that was kind of hard. So they did a lot of questions with people, asking them about their comfort foods, kind of going layer after layer after layer, like, what is your comfort food? Why does it make you feel? When did you start liking that food? Just trying to find out really what it was. And they found that a lot of people have comfort foods that go back to an event. It could be somebody, your first boyfriend, and you were introduced to, I think the example they used was putting M&Ms in with their popcorn. If you went to a foreign country and you tried something that you had never had before, that could be the time frame and how it made you feel. So that was very interesting as well. And they showed that, for example, when you talk to people from other countries that come to the United States, there could be some foods that we have here that people have never tried before. And I can say, as growing up in Western Pennsylvania, we ate a lot of foods that people down here, my husband's family, he had never heard of. My mother used to do a lot of Germanic type foods, so a lot of sauerkraut and brats and different things. And she did one with kielbasa and kraut with tomatoes and onions and peppers. And nobody down here had ever even heard of a dish like that. So definitely, if you go to another country or somebody comes to the United States, it might give you an opportunity to try something that you've never had before. One of the things that they learn too is just how strong emotional connection is to developing how much you like a food or not. And they looked again at World War II veterans. And so they found that before World War II, a lot of ethnic foods were mostly eaten by folks that had grown up in those type of ethnic households or regions. So people that grew up on a farm or something like that may not have had spaghetti and meatballs or something of that nature. They may not have had, people that were Italian may not have tried sauerkraut or different things like that. But when the soldiers went to Europe, they were exposed to a lot of different types of foods, and it was much easier for them to come back and incorporate it. But where the psychological piece really comes in was more obvious on the Pacific coast, or the Pacific front, where the fighting in Iwo Jima and the islands and a lot of the naval type of battles. They found that it really depended on what type of combat situation you were in, whether or not you could really identify and like the foods. So, for example, we had bases in China and things of that nature. So the folks that ended up liking Chinese food were the folks that were not on the front lines. They were more of the hospitals and the medics and the logistics crews that were not doing the hand-to-hand combat on Iwo Jima and places like that. The folks that were doing the hand-to-hand combat had much more psychologically traumatic experiences overall, were far less inclined to like those types of foods. So I can kind of liken this just a little bit. I remember when I was doing chemotherapy for my lupus when I was in my early 20s, they warned me. They said, do not eat any food that's really strong tasting, and don't eat foods that you really, really love right before you have your chemotherapy, because when you feel so nauseous and sick and things like that, it could really make you not want to eat that food anymore. So I could definitely appreciate that. And if you've ever talked to anybody that has maybe eaten a food and had a hangover or gotten food poisoning or something like that, and they just couldn't eat that food anymore, that definitely matches. So, but I think the thing that's important is to recognize that we're all very, very unique. I know one of the things that they mentioned that I kind of took a look at for myself too was, do you have a tendency to eat the best food of the meal or on your plate first, or do you save it for last? And we were talking about this at work, and it was kind of interesting because she didn't really fit into the criteria, but a lady that I work with said she would always eat what she liked the most first. And I always would save at least a little bit of what I like the most last, so that I'd have that last bit to savor in my mouth. And what they showed is that most people that would eat the favorites first, most of them, again, this lady didn't apply, but they grew up in households where there was a lot of competition for food. So they were the youngest, or there were a lot of kids. So then you would hurry up and eat your favorite food first to make sure that you got some. I was the oldest, and it was just my brother and I. And so I never had to really worry about that. Plus, my brother and I liked pretty different foods. So I loved Brussels sprouts, and he didn't. So I never had to worry about getting seconds of Brussels sprouts. So I noticed that a lot with animals. My husband and I have rescued a lot of cats, and I grew up rescuing a lot of dogs with my family. And you can always tell an animal that's been living on the streets or that grew up where food was a scarcity, and how protective they were of the food, and how food driven and motivated they were. We had one cat that was always picked on and was starving when she was a kitten, and it took her years before she would mellow out and realize that she's always going to get her food. And then she got to the point where she would just sit back and wait and let the other cats get fed, and she'd get her food and she'd be fine. Earlier on, though, she'd be batting the other cats out of the way and be very aggressive about it. So I guess I can see that food competition piece coming out. So when it comes to the reengineering strategies here, these really resonate with me as a health coach, because these are very similar to things that I tell my clients. Don't ever deprive yourself. If there's something that you really like, I think it's important to have yourself a little bit of that. I have a video out there that I actually did on treating versus cheating. I don't believe in cheating yourself of anything. If you want to treat, have a small treat. I also don't believe in deprivation diets where you're not doing certain food groups at all anyway. So definitely don't deprive yourself, because that will definitely psychologically make you want it more and more and more, and you'll be inclined to overindulge. And then I think it's important to take a look at some of your comfort foods and look at ways, can you make them healthier? Can you pair them with something healthier? If you're rewarding yourself for doing something good, instead of having the molten chocolate lava cake, maybe you have something else with a little bit of chocolate, or you just kind of balance it out a little bit. It's still good to reward yourself, but try to look at ways to make the options a little healthier. Maybe add some fresh fruit to something that you're eating. Maybe also look at, savory types of things as a comfort food too. So I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think about the comfort food. I know this is one of my longer videos because I think comfort food is a fun thing. I was sitting there thinking about some of mine, and I honestly can't tell you when macaroni and cheese became one of my all-time comfort foods. I know it's something that I enjoy eating, but my body doesn't enjoy it a lot, especially if I have gluten, whole wheat type of pasta or anything like that. I do better if it's gluten-free, but definitely macaroni and cheese, and like a really good chili in the fall or the winter time. Homemade ice cream, different things like that. But some of them are seasonal, some of them are based on special occasions. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about comfort foods. Do you find that you eat them more when you're happy, when you're not? I'd love to hear your comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, there are other videos in this series. Take a look at them. Please feel free to subscribe and hit the notify button. If you're interested in a free health consultation, there's a link for that down below as well. I can do them remotely for folks outside the Charlotte area or in person in Charlotte. So I look forward to hearing from you and hearing all your comments. Take care, and don't deprive yourself of those comfort foods. Be well.